خوشنودی اموات این جمع انشاءالله از بیانات جوان گرامی و میلاد علی قنبری استفاده کنیم. صلوات بلندی ختم کنیم.
وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل. As you're aware, over the last few days, our kind Ahmadi brothers have talked about the duties of parents with regards to raising their children. I want to now draw your attention to an ayah of the Holy Quran whereby Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, "Believers, save yourselves and your families from the fire." Initially hearing this, you might think that Allah is solely addressing parents, as you would assume that parents are responsible for saving their families from the fire. However, Allah is actually addressing all of us, including the youth, since He says, "O you who believe, save yourselves and your families, not yourselves and your children." Which raises the important question, what role can the youth play in not only saving themselves, but also their families from the hellfire? To help answer this question, I refer to the famous Battle of Hunain, which took place between the Muslims and the pagans from the tribe of Hawazin shortly after the Prophet had completed his conquest of Mecca. At one point, the Prophet's army of 12,000 was suddenly ambushed in the pitch black darkness of night by an enemy army of over 20,000 soldiers. There was chaos and destruction everywhere, and almost every single one of the Muslims abandoned the Prophet, fleeing to save their own lives, except for just 8 bright souls. These were people who had the highest level of faith. These were people whose love for the Prophet and Islam was so much that at that point in time, nothing mattered to them more other than to protect their Prophet. Amongst these 8 people was, of course, Ali ibn Abi Talib, who has the special title of Asadullah, the great lion of Allah. But there was also a 15-year-old boy by the name of Usama bin Zayd. The Prophet was not his father, nor was he his uncle, nor his brother. But yet at the same time, the Prophet meant everything to him. I want you to imagine being in the position of young Usama. You are a young boy in the middle of a battle, being surrounded by an enemy army of over 20,000 in the pitch black darkness of night. You are surrounded by all of this chaos and destruction. And then to make matters even worse, almost every single one of your fellow soldiers who are far more experienced and older than you, flee the battlefield running to save their own lives. Osama had to face the same choice. He could either run to save himself, or he could stand by the Prophet and face almost certain death. But despite being in this incredibly terrifying situation, this astonishing example of a youth chose to stay loyal towards his Prophet, standing by him till the very end. And in doing so, he demonstrated incredible levels of faith, maturity, bravery, selflessness, beyond what would have been expected of someone his age. In essence, Osama is a reflection of the hadith from Imam Muhammad Baqir alayhi salam, who states that the believer is harder than a mountain, for the mountain is dispensable, whereas nothing can separate a believer from his religion. Now, if I take a moment to reflect on my own life and actions, I realize that I would most certainly have been amongst those people who would have abandoned the Prophet. Why do I say this? I say this because of the actions I have performed up until now, struggling to avoid simple sins that could have so easily been avoided. Much like many of today's youth who are willing to abandon their religion for the sake of a little temporary comfort and enjoyment in this world. For instance, they are willing to go to restaurants and bars that serve alcohol and non-halal food for the fear of being left out. They are willing to go to social gatherings such as the cinema, even if there are people from the opposite gender attending. They are even willing to skip their wajib prayers to play games online and in person, the former of which is even more disrespectful, since you are likely in the comfort of your own home, have access to water to perform wudu, and your qibla is there unknown. We willingly do these things we know we shouldn't, and then we make excuses for why we have messed up. I often hear our youth say, we cannot be like the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, since they were infallible. So what's the point in even trying? Or I often hear them say, we are young and have many years ahead of us. We have loads of time to change, as though they have a crystal ball and can see well into the future. Or perhaps have a signed letter from Allah guaranteeing them 90 plus years. This is, of course, the completely wrong way of thinking. Usama was not an infallible. He was not the son of the Imams. He wasn't even an adult. But despite this, he chose to prioritize his religion. And it is for this reason that after 1400 years, he is remembered as being one of the best companions of Rasulullah. Now, another major event that took place during the life of young Usama is that in the days leading up until the Prophet's martyrdom, the Prophet appointed Usama to be the commander of an army that was to go and confront the Romans in Balqa, Jordan. Among those required to join were the likes of Abu Bakr, Umar and Uthman. May Allah curse them. But these so-called companions raised objections to Usama's leadership, claiming he was too young and inexperienced to be a commander. They claimed that they were old enough to be the grandfather of Usama, whereas Usama himself was no older than 20 years old. The Prophet emphatically dismissed these ridiculous excuses and is known to have said, Usama's army must leave at once. May Allah curse those who do not join him. But despite this, those companions, they refused. They refused for many reasons, but their ill intentions and acts of disobedience are a discussion for itself. The point remains that the Prophet cursed them and anyone else who did not join. In essence, through those emphatic words, the Prophet is sending two key messages to us. The first is that the Muslims are not to consider the youth unworthy or incapable of carrying out religious duties due to being young. Rather, if they can demonstrate the required maturity, the required trustworthiness, the required enthusiasm to follow the path of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam and to perform religious duties, then they should be encouraged to do so, whether it be through assisting with Majales preparations, giving speeches, or helping with charitable causes. The second point is that the success and progression of Islam is dependent on the actions of our youth today, since they are the future flag bearers of the religion. But examining our society, our current youth, often labeled as Gen Z, lack the correct mindset needed to have a positive impact. For instance, they prefer to spend all day browsing the internet and playing video games instead of going outside to exercise and socialize with other people, meaning they now lack the basic skills needed to build meaningful relationships. They don't have the patience to work hard towards meaningful goals, such as gaining knowledge, and expect everything to be handed to them. They are more concerned about the number of followers they have on Instagram and what their online friends think about them, instead of whether Allah, the Ahlul Bayt and their parents are pleased with them. Perhaps one analogy which will help to emphasize the importance of our youth is for them to view themselves as being gardeners. You may question, why do I say this? But when you look at a garden, it requires a lot of time and effort to maintain. It requires someone to water the plants, for someone to remove the weeds, for someone to maintain the soil. And if these actions are not performed, then that garden will not grow and flourish, bearing good fruit. Therefore, as the future flag bearers of our religion, our youth need to take action to improve themselves, starting from today, before it is too late. For Imam Ali alayhi salam mentions in a hadith there are two things whose worth is only known to the one who has lost them: youth and health. Now, going back to the ayah of the Quran I mentioned earlier, believers, save yourselves and your families from the fire, it is clearly evident that Usama obeyed this commandment through fulfilling his duties towards the Prophet, which is of course essential for our success in the Akhirat, but also in fulfilling the duties he had towards his immediate family, namely his martyred father Zayd ibn Haritha and his mother Ayman, who were both amongst the first people to accept the Prophet's invitation towards Islam. Usama did this by striving in the way of Allah, which not only carries incredible rewards for himself, but also for his parents, who will receive a share of that reward for having raised him. This is an essential point that our youth need to reflect on, since our beloved parents will be purified and rewarded for our good actions, but may be punished for our acts of disobedience, as demonstrated in this story whereby Isa alayhi salam once walked past a grave whose occupant was being tortured. A year later, he walked past the same grave to find that the torture had been ceased. So he asked Allah about this, to which Allah responded by saying, "The son of the occupant of this grave has paved the public path and has taken custody of an orphan. And therefore, for the good deeds of the son, the father was forgiven in his grave." So to summarize, Usama, this incredible young man, fulfilled his duties towards his master, his prophet, and his beloved parents by not abandoning his religion for the sake of his own comfort and enjoyment in this temporary world. Much like the blessed companions of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. In the days leading up until Ashura, Imam Hussein was approaching Kufa, where he came across this Christian lady camped in the barren desert. This lady was the mother of Wahab, a 17-year-old Christian boy who had been married just days prior. The Imam approached the lady and asked, "Is there anything I can do to help you?" To which the lady responded by saying, "We are camped in the barren desert. It is scorching hot. There is no water. Our animals are suffering." So the Imam immediately raised his hands into the air, performed the prayer, and water erupted from the ground. The lady was in absolute shock. She didn't know how to thank Imam Hussein and inquired, "Are you a prophet?" To which the Imam responded, "I am not a prophet, nor am I a Christian. I am Hussein, the son of Zahra." The Imam then proceeded towards Kufa. Later that day, Wahab approached his mother, who recalled the encounter. As soon as Wahab heard the blessed name of Hussein, he felt something in his heart. How can someone hear the blessed name of Hussein and not feel something in his heart? He felt inspired, so he decided to follow him. And narrations state that he, along with his wife and his mother, they arrived in Karbala on the 7th of Muharram. Upon arriving, he quickly learnt about the true situation. He learned about Yazid's evil plans to assassinate the grandson of the Holy Prophet. He decided that he couldn't stand still and let that happen. So he decided to join. Speaking to his mother about this, he asked, "Mother, are you pleased?" To which his mother said, "I am the proudest mother in Iraq." Initially, Imam Hussein was reluctant to accept him as a soldier. The Imam said to him, "Wahab, you have just been married. Yazid is after me. This is a battle concerning the Muslims. You are free to go. Save yourself. Don't risk your life." At which point, Wahab looked towards Imam Hussein and said, "O grandson of the Holy Prophet, if that is the case, then I too am from now on a Muslim." On the day of Ashura, Wahab fought an incredible battle, beyond what I can justify with my words, killing several enemy soldiers. At one point he stopped to look at his mother and asked, "Mother, are you pleased with me?" To which his mother said, "May Allah be pleased with you, my son. But I would only be really pleased to see you dying in action, protecting the grandson of the Holy Prophet." Wahab returned to the battlefield with renewed determination, killing several more soldiers until he was surrounded by all sides and couldn't fight any longer. Umar ibn Sa'd, may Allah curse him, then ordered that his head be severed and thrown back to his mother. His mother, seeing the head of Wahab, picked it up, wiped the dust from the forehead, kissed it and threw it back, saying, "Praise and thanks be to Allah for making me proud in front of Hussein with your martyrdom. This was sadaqah given in the way of Allah and will not be taken back." Wahab, much like Usama, devoted his life for the sake of Islam. And in doing so, not only did he save himself from the hellfire, but also his mother and his wife, who also turned Muslim, with his wife also being amongst those who were martyred in the plains of Karbala. May Allah help us to follow in the footsteps of these pure role models and to be among the loyal companions of the Ahl Bayt alayhi salam. Allahumma aj'al mahyaya mahya Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad wa mamati mamata Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma
خوش